Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Kiddushin, pages 49 through 55, Memtet through Nun Hey. 49. Asara kabim yofi yadu la'olam. 10 measures of beauties descended into the world. Tishanat Yerushalayim, v'echad kol olam kulo. 9 measures were taken by Jerusalem, and 1 measure was taken by the rest of the world. So this is a series of statements in the Talmud where a geographic area is either extolled, praised, or defamed on the basis of it taking much of the world's of supply of a certain character trait. So when it comes to beauty, Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish people, Am Yisrael, is considered the most beautiful place in the world. It's of course a subjective matter, but as a Jew, we can certainly appreciate that comment. What about wealth? 10 measures of wealth entered into the world. 9 were taken by the early Romans, and the rest of the world took 1. So it's not surprising that in a passage emanating from the era of the Roman Empire, when the Romans had all the material wealth, the riches of the world, it comes as no shock that they would be considered as taking 9 out of 10 of the supply of wealth in the world. Nun 50. If a man says to his agent, go and betroth for me a certain woman, this particular woman, in that particular place. And he betrothed her in a different location. They're not betrothed. Why? Because there was a failure of compliance here. It was the right girl, but the wrong location. And since the location was part of the instructions, and you don't follow the instructions, the Kiddushin is ineffective. However, if what the man said to his agent was, she can be found in such and such a place, and he in fact betrothed her in a different location, in that particular instance, they are married. Why? Because the instructions were specific about the identity of the girl, and there was compliance, and it was not really the case regarding location. There was a suggestion you might be able to find her in a particular spot, but not that the Kiddushin had to occur in that particular spot. And it didn't, but that's okay. Doesn't help nor hurt. Therefore, the Kiddushin is valid. Nun Aleph. Lo shavik inish mitzvah de ramya alei, vavin mitzvah de lo ramya alei. The Talmud is here saying a dictum where we assume a person will not forego a mitzvah that is incumbent upon them to perform in order to instead do a mitzvah that is not incumbent upon them to perform. We all want to do mitzvot, but there are those mitzvot which are our achrayut, our responsibility, and those things which are not really our responsibility, but might be floating in the breeze somewhere. We're not going to abandon that which we really must do in favor of something we don't actually have to do. Nun bet 52. If a person were to try to betroth a woman with a supply of meat, whether from Kodesh Kadoshim, so this man may be a Kohen, and he gets a supply of meat that he's able to eat from the highest level sacrifices that he's supposed to eat in the Azarah, the court of the temple, or he could be even a non-Kohen, and he has Kanshib Kalim, the meat of lesser sacrificial animals that he's allowed to eat in Yerushalayim. So this meat has value, and let's say he tried to use that item of value for a Kiddushay Kesef, a Shava Kesef, in order to betroth a woman. Does this work or does it not work? And the answer is it does not work. Because in order to betroth a woman with something which is worth value, shava kesef, it must be that it really is yours. Whereas sacrificial foodstuffs are mamon gavoha. They're the property of the utmost high, of on high, of Hashem. We're allowed to eat it. We're instructed to consume the flesh of the sacrifice, so we do get personal benefit from it. However, it isn't really ours. Therefore, we cannot use those items to engage in acts of Kiddushin. Nun Gimel. So here the Gemara is talking about how the Kohanim would divide up the lechem hapanim, the showbread. Now, the 12 loaves of the showbread were consumed by the Kohanim every Shabbat, after the bread had been sitting on the shulchan, on the table for the previous week. Hatznuim moshchim edehem, those who are tsanua, modest, they're not getting into the fray, to the action, they'll withdraw their hand, because there was a struggle, there was almost a fight, a ruckus to try to see who could get the most of the lechem hapanim. The people really wanted it; they wanted to eat it. They're hustling with their colleagues to see who can get it. If you're tsanua, you won't fight over it. Hagagaranim cholkim. However, the gluttons, they would distribute it among themselves. My cholkim. What do you mean distribute it? This was not a fair distribution by any stretch of the imagination. Chotfim, they would grab it. There was one incident where a guy took his portion and grabbed his fellow's portion. And they called him Ben Chamson, essentially a thief, till his dying day. That he was a grabber. He didn't just take what belonged to him; he grabbed somebody else's. So the Gemara is telling stories about how the Kohanim did not always behave themselves when trying to access a portion of the showbread. Nun Dalet. Halacha ke Rabbi Meir. The law follows Rabbi Meir in certain halachic discussions because his opinion is the one recorded in the Bechirta, the choicest of all the Masechtot of the Mishnah. What is the greatest tractate of Mishnah from the perspective of reliability of its statements, and therefore our ability to count upon it for halachic discussion, for halachic determination? Eduyot, the tractate of testimonies. So when you want to know what the halacha is, it follows Reb Meir because his opinion appears in Masechet Eduyot regarding that particular machloket. Nunhe 55. What happens if you find an animal in the vicinity of Jerusalem? So the Talmud tells us that you have to assume that that animal might be a sacrifice that got lost, and you can't just use it for mundane purposes, for chulin. Rather, it's hektish. It has to be assumed to be a sacrificial offering. If it's a zachar, if it's a male animal, we'll assume that it's an olah, a burnt offering. So the Gemara says, but olot are not the only form of sacrifice that use male animals. Dilma asham mitzora. Maybe it's the guilt offering of a mitzora, of a leper. Or maybe it's that of a nazir, of an ascetic who is cleansing himself at the end of his term. So the Gemara says, well, we're going to discount the possibility that it's from a Metzora or a Nazir, delo shchichi, because those are uncommon occurrences. It's very rare for a person, certainly nowadays, but even back then, for a person to take on a Nazirite vow, and confirmed leprosy is also not very common. So therefore, if you find a random animal, it's a zachar, we'll assume that it was an olah. Everyone have a great week.